welcome back to the channel. It's your girl Rochelle from Rochelle.Handmade.Designs, and in this video we are doing a sew along, a much overdue sew along. All right, so you guys know this sew along was supposed to be recorded way back in February, and I'm just now getting to it because I needed to order more fabric for the sleeves. And if you've seen my pattern review, you know what happened for me needing some fabric, some more fabric for the sleeves, and I wanted to make sure it matched. All right, now before we get started, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe button, and also turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right on into this sew along. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the next sew along. This sew along is for the 100 likes that I received on video 151, which was the Simplicity Fall 2021 pattern haul that I did last year in 2021. I said if I receive 100 likes on that video, I will do a sew along. So this is the sew along, and the pattern that I am doing is Simplicity 9452, which I'll go ahead and put up on the screen so you can see that. Now this is an easy to sew pattern. The only thing that I'm gonna pretty much do is kind of walk you through how to do the pleats. Not every last one will be doing the front, and then you could tackle doing the back yourself. Everything else for a blouse is pretty much the same, no difference. So let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces. Now, before I get into the pattern pieces, I want to talk about the tools and supplies you will need. Now, I'm not going into a whole bunch of details on tools and supplies you need, because you will need your basic sewing supplies, like your scissors, your seam rippers, your pens, your marking tools, rotary cutters. If you cut using a rotary cutter, you will need all those supplies for every time you sew. The only additional notion that you will need will be 3/8 of an inch elastic for your shoulder seams and for your wrists. All right, those are the only additional notions that you will need. So let's go ahead and get into the pattern pieces you will need in order to construct this blouse. All right, from our instructions, you will need basically all the pattern pieces except for pattern piece number 8. So you need your front, your back, your sleeve, your casing, your front facing, your back facing, your shoulder elastic guide, and then you need your elastic guide for your wrist. All right, so I'm going to show you those pattern pieces now. All right, so the first pattern piece is pattern piece number 1, which is your front. Now, remind you, I'm following along the view. See, I have made all of my adjustments. If you need to make any adjustments, please do so now. You have seen me make adjustments before, so just go ahead and make your adjustments that you need. All right, so this is the front. You need to cut 2 of fabric. The next one is pattern piece number 2, which is your back. You need to cut 2 of fabric. You need to cut pattern piece number 3, which is your sleeve. You need to also cut 2 of fabric for your sleeve. Next pattern piece is pattern piece number 5, which is your front facing. You need to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. Pattern piece number 6, which is also your back facing, you need to cut 1 on the fold of fabric and 1 on the fold of interfacing. You need to cut, well, this you don't need to cut, you need to just basically, this is your elastic guide. You need to cut 2 of the 3/8 inch elastic for pattern piece number 7, which goes for your shoulder elastic. Pattern piece number 8, which is the elastic for your wrist, you need to cut 2 of fabric, not fabric, but 2 of elastic. I'm sorry about that. Next one is pattern piece number 4, which is your casing. You need to cut 2 of fabric. And those are all the pattern pieces that you need to cut out of elastic or out of fabric. So let's go ahead and get right on into the sewing. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the front. So you're gonna make the pleats in the back yourself. I'm gonna kind of show you how to do the front. So the first thing you wanna do is you have pleats right here. So you have this area that says pleats. Now, with the pleats, your pleats is going to go towards one side. So you're gonna take this dot and meet it up with that dot, and this one over to this one over to this one, and vice versa, okay? All the way through. So all of your pleats is gonna go to the right on this pattern piece, okay? So I'm gonna take it up. Now I have marked where the dots are by making little X's, so you can see that right here on mine, and that just tells me where I need to stop stitching, okay? Because you're gonna stitch your pleats down. All right, So the first thing you want to do is, I have 2 dots right here, which are these 2 dots right here. So you're going to take this pleat and match it up to that pleat, and then you're going to do the rest of them on the front yourself. All right. So now what I'm going to do is take these 2 dots right here and move it over to those 2 dots. Now I just want to make sure that you know that if you see where it says inside and outside, like it says on the pattern, that means that you need to, inside means the wrong side of your fabric, outside means the right side of your fabric, okay? So just make sure you make a note of that. Now what I'm going to do is go ahead and pin. And then I'm going to take my other 2 dots right here, and I'm going to bring it over, and I'm going to pin there too. Now I also have clippings at the very top, and that just tells me where, right here, where I need to go to meet up with the other clipping, okay? And then I'm going to pin there, and then I'm going to do that all the way down. Now once I finish off my pleats, I'm just going to stitch down to hold the pleats in place. So go ahead and finish making your pleats, and then stitch your pleats down from the top dot all the way down to the bottom dot. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have made my pleats in both of the fronts, the next thing you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're going to pin both fronts and sew the center front seam where the notches are, okay? So with right sides together, I'm going to turn it this way so you can see. Now one thing I want to mention is, you had like some raw edge right here. Now I did serge mine after I made that pleat, so you can do that as well. So what you're going to do is, with right sides together, pin at your notch, then pin at the top and at the bottom, and go ahead and sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to backstitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew your center front seams now. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the center front seam stitched from the top to the bottom using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I finished off my seam allowance, now I'm going to turn it to the right side, and now you see that we have the center seam. However, we do need to make this last pleat. Now what I'm going to do is take this side and bring it over to the other side. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So you may or may not be able to see my 2 X's right here that I marked with white chalk. So I'm just going to take that line and just bring it over to the other one, and I'm going to pin. Now at the very top, I have a clip right here. I'm going to just make sure that this clip matches up with the next clip right there, and I'm just going to bring that over, which forms my pleat, okay? And then I'm just going to pin there. And then to hold everything together, I'm just going to pin, so I could go to my sewing machine and stitch using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance from the top all the way down to that dot, okay? So if you have not made your pleats, that's exactly what you're going to do. What I just said, I'm going to say it one more time, because you're going to do the same thing for your back pattern piece, which is pattern piece number 2. So what you're going to do, you're going to bring the first pleat to the second pleat, and you're just going to basically bring all the pleats together. Once you bring the pleats together from the top, you're going to sew from the top using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance from the top all the way down to the dot. So you should have 3 on one of your fronts and then 3 on the other side. Once you sew the center front seam, you're going to make that last pleat, which is what I just did here. You see that last pleat right here, and I'm going to sew from the top all the way down to this dot using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. It's where you see these pins, from the top all the way down to the dot using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to press my pleat towards the left side of my front. You're going to do the exact same thing that you just did for the front to your back. So go ahead and finish the front, and then go ahead and move over to your back. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I went ahead and done my back the pleats from my back pattern piece. I also finished off the center back seams. I also made the pleat in the very center that I needed to move, and I pressed all of my pleats towards the right. All right, so press them towards the right before I stitch the center back seam, and press them to the right before I stitch the center back seam for the other one, okay? Now, one thing that I did do is, because it looks exactly the same, is I made a B in the back to signify the back of my pattern piece for pattern piece number 2, okay? So the next thing you want to do is, with right sides together, you're going to attach the front to the back at the side seams. So this is my back facing up on the table. I'm going to grab my front, and with right sides together, I'm going to pin front to back at the side seam. Now just remember that you know that your front, you also have, like, I serged the side, which made a pleat as well. All right, so what you're going to do is go ahead and pin your side seams. So you should have a notch, pin at that notch right here, that single notch. Pin at the top, pin at the bottom, and then pin the length of your side seam. You're going to do that to both sides, so go ahead and pin your side seams now. All right, now using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew your side seam. Once you finish sewing your side seams, go ahead and finish both of your side seams off. Go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the side seam sewn, I have my front looking up at me. I turned it right side out. This is the back. So go ahead and move your top out of the way and grab your sleeve, because we are now going to construct our sleeves. Now, I started doing it, and I'm just gonna tell you what I did, and then you could do the same thing, okay? Now, you should have 2 dots at the sleeve cap of your sleeves. Using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a regular length stitch, which is 2.5, you're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam at a 1/2 inch seam allowance from dot to dot, okay? On both sleeves. After you do that, you're going to take pattern piece number 4, which is your casing piece, okay? And then all you're gonna do is, with wrong sides together, so basically I'm gonna grab pattern piece number 4 right here. With wrong sides together, like this, you're gonna take it to the ironing board and press. Press it all the way down, and then baste across. Now, I based at a 1/2 inch seam allowance for 2 reasons. The seam allowance at my sleeve is 5/8. I don't want to have to unpick basting stitch when I'm done sewing my seams. So therefore, I did a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just in case, I don't want to unpick it, okay? Now that I talked about that, the next thing you're going to do is, with right sides together, you're going to attach your casing to your sleeves, matching up those dots. So you have a dot, and it's kind of hard for you to see mine, but I can see it right here. I'm going to match that dot with this dot on my sleeves, and I'm going to pin. And I'm just going to pin all the way around my sleeves. Do that for both of your sleeves. So I'm going to pin at that dot, and then I'm going to come over here, and there's a dot right there, and I'm going to pin that dot to this dot right here, and I'm going to pin there. Now I'm just going to make sure that I'm pinning all the way around my sleeves. So go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that I have the casing pinned onto my sleeves, using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance between the dots. After you do that, go ahead and stitch again using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now, if you want to use your serger, you can do that and stitch at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. But once you do that, you need to press your seams up. Okay, so press your seams up towards the casing piece. Okay, so go ahead and do that now. After you do that, go ahead and create a roll of stitching using a basting stitch at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. press up and then form a narrow hem, okay? So go ahead and do both of those steps now. All right, so now that I have my casing sewn on, I have it finished off at the top. I have the seam allowance pressed towards the sleeve. I also created a narrow hem for my elastic at the very bottom. All I did was create a stitching 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, pressed to that line, and then pressed up the 5/8 of an inch and sewn on the top at this line is created at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now what I'm going to do is take my 1/4 of an inch elastic. It is basically, if you take pattern piece number 9, which is your elastic guide for your sleeve, right? You're just going to measure it out. I am cutting a size 16 because that's the size that I cut for my top. So you're just going to measure it out and cut, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is basically, I'm not going to do it like it says in the instructions. All I'm going to do is take my elastic, sift it through. When I feel as if my elastic is going to start getting stuck, I'm just going to tack it down and then finish sifting it through and then tack it down at the other end, okay? So that's what you're going to do for your elastic before you sew the underarm seam, okay? Now, at the top of the casing, you're going to grab pattern piece number 7, which is your shoulder elastic guide. And you need to have elastic that is 3/4 of an inch wide. So you're just going to measure, cut 2, and then you're going to take your safety pin and then just stift it all the way through. I'm going to do the same thing and just tack it down at the ends, okay? I'm going to do that for both my shoulder seams as well as my underarm seam. So go ahead and do your elastic casing now. After you do your elastic casing with right sides together, you're going to pin at the notch right here. And then you're going to pin all the way down and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning and at the end, and then finish off your seam allowance, which is your underarm seams, okay? So go ahead and do your elastic and your underarm seams now. All right, so now that I have the elastic on the casing of the sleeves, or the shoulder sleeve, seams, or sleeve, I guess you could call it seams. And then I have the elastic at the sleeves, okay? So shoulder seams and the hem allowance sleeves, okay? Elastic casings. All right, so now what you're gonna do is grab your top. And what you're going to do is, with right sides together, okay? So basically this is my back and this is my front, okay? So what I'm going to do is, with right sides together, I'm going to pin my sleeve. So I have it this way. And I'm going to match my underarm seams, and just make sure that your underarm seams is facing the back of your seam allowance. Now, my back is where these 2 notches are. Right here, there's 2 notches, so that signifies the back, and where the single notch is, that signifies the front. So I'm gonna make sure I match up my single notches here and pin there. I'm gonna also pin along the armhole as well. And then there's 2 double notches. So that signifies the back. So I'm gonna match that up. And then you have some dots. So the dots that you have on your shoulder seams, which are the dots right here, that meets up with the dot up here at the top right there. So you're going to match that up just like that, okay? And then you're going to pin, and you're going to pretty much do that same thing to the other side. So just make sure you are pinning there, and then of course you're going to pin along the rest of your armhole. And then you're going to do the same thing to the other side. So just go ahead and finish pinning your armhole, and then go to the other side Let me go ahead and adjust again. All right. And I'm just going to pin. And yes, I know I have the elastic extended and just kind of basted it right there, simply because when I put it on my shoulder, I don't want it to fall off. So I will adjust just in case I may need to pull up some more once I have the top on. So that's why I have not cut that little piece off yet. You could do the same thing, or you could cut it off. Now it's completely up to you. Now that I have it pinned, you're gonna do the same thing to the other sleeve, but using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back stitch at the beginning, and sew all the way around. So basically you're gonna start at the top and sew all the way around and stop at the other end, back stitching at the beginning and at the end. Once you do that, go ahead and finish off your seam allowance, okay? So go ahead and do both of your sleeves now. All right, so now that I have my sleeves done and my shoulder seams done, the only thing left for you to do is your facing, okay? So basically what you're going to do is grab pattern piece number 5, which is your front, and pattern piece number 6, which is your back, okay? Now, I went ahead and marked which one is my front and which one is my back for both pattern piece number 5 and pattern piece number 6. Also, you need to remember which side is your front and which side is my back. Now, what I did is I showed you before that I have an F right here for the front and a B right here for the back. So that's how I know which one is the front and which one is the back. Now, what you're going to do is you have dots. So you're going to match up your dots, like this dot to that dot right here on your shoulder casing, okay? So match up that dot on both sides and pin all the way across for both your front and your back. And then using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're gonna start at the dot and sew all the way across, basically from dot to dot. After you do that, press the seams up towards your facing and then understitch. After you understitch, you're just going to press your facing to the inside. Make sure you finish off both of your side seams. I'm going to do that. I forgot to do that, but I'm going to do that as well before I stitch this together and fold it in and then finish it off. That's all you're going to do, and then just tack it down on the sides. Once you do that, you're all done with your blouse, but I'm going to show you the finished look before I take pictures in it. So go ahead and sew from dot to dot, understitch, and then press it to the inside now. All right, so now that I went ahead and finished off my front facing, I just need to give it a little bit more of a press, and my back facing, and I also put a label because I am giving this top to my sister because she really wanted it. So I went ahead and put my daughter's label in simply because I don't have many more of my labels left. So, and I have quite a bit for my daughter. So I went ahead and put the label in, and I am all done. The only thing I have to do is go ahead and finish up the hem, and this top is all done. This is Simplicity 9452. I hope you enjoyed the sew along, and also don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So I'll catch you in the next video, and as always, keep sewing. All right, so there you have it. That is the full sew along for the Mrs. Pleated square neck top. It's a pullover pleated square neck top. I hope you enjoyed the sew along, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on the notification bell so you are notified every time I upload a new video. So I'll catch you in the next video, and as always, keep sewing.